Now let's go ahead and complete this contact form so you can get the rest of the story on how model binding works. Our next step here is to try to fill in these pieces of information using configuration. We'd like to be able to read some sort of configuration information, and that's going to all start in the startup. We're going to go ahead and create a configuration object based on some places to read the configuration, and we'll do that in the constructor of our startup. And we'll create a builder called a configuration builder, and we'll go ahead and add environment variables to that configuration builder. So this is going to allow us to add different sources of configuration. Environment variables are a common place, especially when you get into cloud hosts, to be able to read certain pieces of information from the environment in order to determine certain things about your system. So I always like to add environment variables. And we're going to want to create a configuration object by then using the builder to build the configuration information from all of those different sources. Now this configuration object is something that I'm just going to expose as a public static iConfiguration root object. This is going to be something that we can query to get configuration information out, and by making a static of the startup, we can then use it in different parts of our application. And so when startup happens, we'll go ahead and read these, and then go ahead and build the configuration. But for us, we don't want to have to configure the site's email name as an environment variable. We'd like to be able to actually create it as JSON. We can do that by adding JSON file. And this is actually in another package, Microsoft Framework Configuration.json. And so we'll go ahead and add that. The configuration stuff is built into ASP.NET, but as we need different configuration types, we'll need to add those packages. Now, add JSON file doesn't work on its own. It needs to know where we're actually pulling this information from. Now, we might be able to want to do something like config.json. That does make sense. But we actually need one additional piece of information. So much like other places in the startup, we can have ASP.NET 5 inject certain interfaces we need. And one of them is application environment. Application environment knows about where this is being executed, regardless of what operating system we're on. And so what we want to do is tell the configuration builder, if you need to look for files, I'm going to give you the root that any of those files are going to use as the starting point. And append gives us that by giving us the application base path as a string. So by providing that to the configuration builder, should be able to find a file in the root of our project called config.json, which of course we need to build. So add a new file, config.json, and I'm going to create in this is just JSON, an app settings property. Now app settings will have a number of sub-properties to it. This sort of creates a container in the configuration for us. And I'll call this site email address. And I'll just give it a bogus one for now. If you want to get a hold of me, ask questions about the course, that's my email address. It's not really. And let me show you how we would use this then. Because what this startup is doing is it's creating a configuration builder, taking that application base path as where the root of the site lives, and then saying, go find the JSON file called config.json, read it in as a set of configuration variables, and by the way, also do that with everything that's in the environment. So I have this dictionary of things I can look up. Then over in our app controller, when we want to supply these, we can get the email address by using that startup class configuration, and it's just a dictionary with names and values. The hierarchy is separated by colons, not periods like you might imagine, because not all data is in JSON. Could be in INI files, could be in all sorts of places. So there's sort of a mapping of hierarchical structure using colons. So this will be app settings, colon, site email address. And since we're going to send it to that address, we're also going to use it as the from address, just so that it's always coming from our site. If we wanted to use their address as the from, we could certainly do that, but we would need additional rights to most mail servers. So I find it easier just to send to and from myself, and then include in the body of the email the actual email address of the person that sent it. Ends up being a little safer. So let's show this work. I'm just going to execute our project briefly. So we go to that contact page, and let's use another address. Let's go ahead and send that message. When we get here, we're getting that model in, but let's see if we're getting this email from the configuration file. There's our email as me@aol.com. And then when we run the mail service, we can see here in the debug output that we're seeing this email being sent. And then we can continue along our way. We can assume that it was sent. But what if not everything went well? This is where we're going to want to use that validation information. We used it on the client to make sure we could send that information, but we actually want to do it here in the action method as well. We do this by saying if model state is valid, and this is a dictionary type class that is just going to contain all the state about the model that was bound here. So if all of the data in here matched here, then we should get in is valid. Now you might think, well, the form is already checking it. Of course it's going to be valid. How could it ever not be valid? Remember, this is the web. This is the wild, wild west, of course. So someone could craft up a post message with those 3 contact pieces with whatever they want to say that is going to skip all that JavaScript that's being checked on. So you always have to check that you're getting valid data in as well. And so this provides both of those. This allows the client-side code to be helpful in telling the user about what they need as far as what the data requirements are for, in our case, this contact view model. But then when that data is posted over to us, it reconfirms that it is still valid, so we don't end up saving bad data to the database or sending emails with who knows what in them, or really allowing, bad things to happen on our server. I like to call it the belts and suspenders approach of security. Anytime you have any validation code, it's nice to check it on the client. You have to check it on the server. There's no way around that. So this guarantees that it is in fact valid. And if it's not valid, it will fall through and our form will be shown again, and that's where it will include information that may be wrong. And so we can actually do that and use that model state for our own needs, because sometimes the validation really can't be done on the client. You have to do some server sort of checks. And let's just do this. If string is null, empty, or white space email. So if our email didn't get received or isn't configured correctly for some reason, let's go ahead and say model state dot add model error. Now we could include a string here for the key, and the key would be the name of the property that's wrong. But that's not our case. We actually have a generic or an object level error, so we're going to include an empty string there, and that translates to an object level error, and we're going to give it a message. Could not send email configuration problem. Now this, even though we're showing it as a problem in the form, isn't something that the user could really fix. But at least we're giving him some valid error information here. If it succeeded, we can go ahead and check that Boolean value, and we can do some additional work here. So if we actually sent the email, we can go model state.clear. And that will clear the form, not just the state of the validation, but it will clear the entire form so that when it gets sent down here back to the view, we have a clean, clear form. And this prevents people from accidentally pressing send 14 times and your IT people being annoyed, like sometimes happens to me. But we'd like to give some information to the users to say, hey, this has been sent, without it looking or feeling like an error. And so one approach here is to actually use that view bag that we used for the title earlier and say, let's just call it message, mail sent. Thanks. So we just have some piece of text here that we can then use in the view. Let's go back to the contact view, and let's just add it here at the top. If viewbag.message, and we're not getting IntelliSense because this is a dynamic object that you can add any sort of property to. And if the property doesn't exist, it will simply return it as null. So we're safe in doing this in case we haven't sent the message. And I'll go ahead and just say div and show that message. Let's see if this has worked. Go to the contact page, and that div isn't showing up at all because the first time we show the view bag message is gone. Include a dummy message. And now when we press message, we're getting that information back to the user. Hey, mail was sent, you're awesome, right? It's been cleared so that our form is no longer valid. If we try to press it again, it'll require them to re-enter it, so you don't get as many mistakes from users. So our contact form is now working. Let's go ahead and wrap up this module.